Hey there, I'm Ryan Boehme, and you're tuning into So You Want to Teach Percussion. This video series is designed particularly for my current Percussion Methods students. Since they aren't able to have a typical Percussion Methods experience due to the current global pandemic, these videos are designed to give them a foundation of the technique outside of class time so that we have more time to play when we're together. But I also hope this video series can be helpful to any music educators out there. Today, we're talking about keyboards. Keyboards are some of my favorite instruments. It's fun to be able to play pitched instruments along with the wind and string players in the ensemble. And there are also a lot of uses for these instruments in solo repertoire and percussion ensemble. But some students who are more comfortable with drums may have a tougher time approaching these instruments. There's scales, there's arpeggios, there's a lot of movement this way around the keyboard, and there's a few other characteristics that are unique to this family of instruments. In this video, we're going to talk about some beginning concepts that your percussionists should know before they begin their keyboard journey. We're going to look at playing position and playing technique.
Mr. Boehme, is this a keyboard instrument?
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine.
First, we're going to talk about playing position. You've heard me say it like 20 times by now. You want to be relaxed and comfortable behind any percussion instrument. From my experience as a teacher, I can say that keyboard instruments usually provide a few more challenges when it comes to being comfortable. That's because a lot of older instruments aren't height adjustable, so no matter how tall or short your students are, they all have to adapt to that one height. This can lead to bad habits, not to mention general discomfort.
Can I play drums now, Mr. Boehme?
Let's look at the effects of keyboard instrument height on our playing position. In these clips, I'm using an Adams 5-octave marimba, which is equipped with a height adjustment system. Here, I purposely set the marimba too high. I can pretty much get my wrists to do what they need to do here, but only if I stick out my elbows. This is going to cause tension in the arms, and it won't be comfortable to play for long periods of time. Now I've set the marimba too low. You'll see some tall students play short instruments like this, where the arms are going almost straight down. I can still bend the wrist, but I'm not able to bend the wrist upward very much to achieve louder dynamics. On the flip side, if your tall students adjust so that their arms and wrists are in a more comfortable position, the only way they can play the instrument is to slouch over like this. I've seen this become a bad habit very quickly, and it's largely due to the height of the instrument, since the student has little choice other than playing this way. Now I've set the keyboard to a height where I can play very similarly to how I play snare drum. A slight downward tilt in the forearm, in a position where I can comfortably hold the mallets over the instrument with neutral wrists. And I'm also able to keep my back straight while I'm playing. Whatever instruments you have in your room, it's ideal for all of your students to be able to play in a position that's as close to this as possible. Height adjustable keyboards are extremely useful for accommodating the various heights of your students. Moving beyond initial posture, it's important to set ourselves in a comfortable position behind the instrument. In this clip, I'm playing a B-flat major scale. The first instinct of many students will be to stand directly in front of the first note they're playing. This makes it very comfortable to play the notes that are local to the first B-flat, but I have to reach out or lean over to make it to the higher notes of the scale. An easy solution for this is to determine the lowest note and highest note of a passage. Then you can set your mallets on those notes and center your body between them. This will typically allow you to play all of the necessary notes comfortably without needing to do too much reaching out or leaning. If I'm reading music on a music stand, I'll want to make sure the stand is also positioned between my lowest and highest notes, so that I have the best chance of comfortably reading while playing. So we know where to stand in terms of side to side, but how close should our body be to the marimba? That usually depends on the musical context. To achieve a characteristic marimba sound, you typically want to play just off-center on each key. Since I'm playing a B-flat scale, I'm going to have to position myself closer to the instrument so that I can comfortably reach the center of the accidentals without needing to change my technique. Another useful option for playing accidentals is to play on the very edge of the bar, so that the playing zone is closer to the playing zones of the natural keys. In this case, I don't have to stand as close to the instrument, since I won't have to reach as far to get to the edges. Playing on the edge of the bar is going to give you a sound that's slightly less full and resonant than playing off-center, but it's still very close to the characteristic marimba sound. This small difference will be less noticeable when playing faster passages, which means your students can aim for the edge of the accidentals when playing fast, so that the natural and accidental playing zones will be closer together. But you have to be careful not to strike on the note of the bar. When you strike over the notes, there's very little resonance, and it causes those notes to stick out too much from the other notes that I'm playing with proper playing zones. If your students are doing this, have them experiment with how close they are to the instrument. making adjustments so that they can hit their desired playing zones easily. Like I say with every instrument, it's super important for your students to be relaxed and comfortable before they even play a note. And teaching your students to keep all these concepts in mind will help them avoid developing bad habits. Now we're going to talk about playing technique. For most keyboards, you're going to be using some kind of mallet. Since mallets typically have very thin shafts, I can hold it similarly to how I would hold a drumstick. I personally like to use American grip, so I can use a door knocking motion to send the mallet up and down. And I can implement my back fingers for faster notes, just like we did for snare drum. My fulcrum or pivot point is going to typically be higher on a mallet than it is on a snare drum stick, mostly because most of the weight of the mallet is coming from this mallet head up here. So instead of gripping the mallet back here, where it looks more like snare drum grip, I'm going to adjust this way for maximum balance. It's also worth noting that mallets aren't going to have a lot of rebound when you're playing keyboard instruments. So unlike many of our other instruments, you're going to have to do a little more work to bring the mallet up to prepare it for the next note. So you're going to want to find a spot where you can comfortably control the mallet in all directions. With the grip established, your students have a few choices for their mallet angle. On mallets like these, which are oval shaped, I can make contact with the instrument here, which is going to result in a more articulate sound due to the core of the mallet that's inside this yarn. Or I can strike here, which is less core focused and more yarn focused. This is going to give me less front to the note, allowing the resonance to be more present. Both of these sounds are good sounds that your students should be able to achieve. In this clip, I'm playing with a more core focused sound. The articulation is present and there's still plenty of resonance. If I angle the mallets so that I'm striking away from the core of the mallet, the articulation is softer and the resonance is the most prominent aspect of the sound. To achieve this mallet angle, I'm going to lift my wrists upwards slightly. This is something we typically don't want to do for other percussion instruments, but it's still possible to use this technique effectively here without too much discomfort. Your students can also mess around with multiple mallet angles, noting the differences in sound of each angle. You may have noticed in these clips that I'm playing very close to the center of the bar. Playing right in the center of a bar will often result in a less resonant sound, so keeping the mallets just off-center is going to give the most characteristic sound. If your students are playing multiple notes on one bar, they'll want to avoid this. Here, the mallets are too separated, so one mallet is near the center and the other is closer to the node, or the spot where the string goes through the bars. Just like I talked about previously, playing too close to the node is going to result in a less resonant sound, meaning your students' hands are going to sound uneven, like this. Focusing on keeping both mallets closer to the center of the bar is going to result in better sound quality. Once we start moving around the keyboard, we have to think about sticking choices. Your students will want to determine stickings for each of their keyboard parts that's going to allow them to comfortably and efficiently maneuver around the keyboard instrument while being as accurate as possible. Here's an example of a less efficient sticking choice. For this A-flat major scale, I'm starting with my right hand. This causes me to play the lowest note with my right hand and the highest note with my left hand, and it makes the arpeggio especially troublesome. The sticking isn't impossible, but it can be improved. In this clip, I'm starting with the left hand and my right hand is playing the highest note. This is a more ergonomic sticking for this scale and arpeggio. It's much more comfortable and easy to be accurate. In general, your students will want to set themselves up to be prepared to play higher notes with their right hand and lower notes with their left hand. There's also this option, which is called manual sticking. With manual sticking, I split my hands between the two manuals, so one mallet is playing the natural keys and the other mallet is playing the accidentals. This changes my sticking from an alternating sticking to one that involves single strokes and double strokes. Even for passages that aren't scalar like this one, your students can mix single strokes with double strokes to find a sticking that's going to allow them to maneuver around the instrument easily. Okay, now let's talk about rolls. In part 2, you'll learn that some types of keyboards are good at sustaining sound, but wooden keyboards like the marimba I'm using in this video typically have a quick decay, which means the notes aren't going to sound for a very long time. So in order to achieve a sustained sound on the instrument, your students are going to have to perform rolls. Rolls are typically written like this, with 3 or more tremolos. To perform these, your students are going to play a single stroke roll. Lower notes are going to be more resonant since the bar is going to be longer, but higher notes aren't quite as resonant since the bar gets so small. That means there's occasionally going to be some audible articulation in your students' rolls. But that's actually a characteristic sound of rolls on these instruments, so your students don't have to avoid the digga-digga sound. But they can use what they know about mallet angles to achieve a lot of different sounds. In this clip, I'm playing a C major scale with rolls. If I'm moving up the keyboard for my next note, I'm going to make sure I play that higher note with my right mallet first, then bring the left mallet over, and I'll do the opposite if I'm moving to a lower note. This helps me avoid any mallet crossovers. I'm actually thinking about playing this rhythm, but if I keep my velocity low and play with a light touch, this rhythm can still sound sustained and not super articulate, since the resonance of the instrument is working with me here. But if this sound is too articulate, I might angle my mallets so that I'm making contact away from the mallet core. Even though I'm playing the same rhythm, the softer front to each note allows the notes to blend together more easily, creating the illusion of a more sustained sound. Like I previously mentioned, larger bars are going to be more resonant. That means your hand speed doesn't have to be quite as fast on lower notes. If I roll too fast here, it starts to sound articulate, and it's just not necessary to roll this fast in this register. Instead, I can save my chops and let the resonance of the instrument help me. In contrast, if I roll too slowly on smaller bars, I run the risk of sounding rhythmic. Have your students experiment with different roll speeds in different ranges, determining which roll speeds are going to give them the most sustained sound.
But Mr. Boehme, watch how fast I can play my marimba rolls.
And that's the gist of everything your students have to consider when they're playing their keyboard parts. By setting up a proper grip, paying attention to stickings, and being aware of the sounds they're making, they're going to be on their way to being keyboard masters in no time at all. I hope this video gave you a thorough introduction to playing keyboard instruments. In part 2, we'll dive a little deeper and we'll talk about keyboard types and mallet choice. Until then, I'm Ryan Boehme, and thanks for tuning in to So You Want to Teach Percussion.